بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. This is Wafa Al-Awadi from Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome to our new session in the Inspirational Projects for Sustainable Energy Initiative. Our session today is about the National UAE Sustainable Aviation Fuel Roadmap. Before starting, I would like to mention the words of our founding father, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Hayyan, that says, "We have worked since the establishment of our state to protect the environment and wildlife. These achievements should be an incentive for us, especially the Emirati youth, who are the future generation, to continue taking care of and keeping the environment safe and clean. Because if we don't, we shall destroy the resources that Allah blessed us with. These resources are not ours alone. They also belong to our children and their children. We are equipping ourselves with the means to realize this vision. The strong foundations of international cooperation have built the architecture for action, and the UAE is proud to be undertaking the preparation to host COP28, ensuring we work together for our shared future. Our global efforts are reflected in our national targets, with the UAE leading the MENA region with the first commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement, complemented by the UAE Net Zero by 2050 strategic initiative. UAE is one of the World Economic Forum Clean Skies for Tomorrow SAF ambassadors. It has contributed the development of sustainable aviation fuel SAF policy booklet, which was published during COP26. In July 2022, the UAE Power to Liquid Roadmap report was launched. The roadmap provides a comprehensive analysis on how to scale up PTL in the UAE by 2050. It considers industrial waste CO2 for PTL SAF production. Our government, companies and research institutions are rapidly translating this into action. In 2019, Etihad operated the world's first flight using fuel made in the UAE from plants grown in saltwater Sustainable Bioenergy Research Consortium of Khalifa University, Etihad Airways, Boeing, ADNOC, Safran, GE, and Power Resources. Emirates and GE are collaborating on a program to conduct a test flight using 100% SAF by the end of 2022. Aviation is challenging industry to decarbonize and will require the development of novel technologies. Our research institutions are stepping up to the task, building the knowledge and tools to ensure our world can be sustainably connected. The sunrise of the new industry will bring jobs, economic growth, and climate benefits to our nation, and we are delighted to present this roadmap for the UAE to become the center of this energy ecosystem. We are working together with many stakeholders to develop the UAE SAF roadmap report, and it will be issued over the next few weeks. Now, I would like to welcome His Excellency Mr. Yusuf Al Ali, the Assistant Undersecretary for Electricity, Water and Future Energy in the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure in the UAE. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Wafa. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Very good morning. I think this panel is really happening in the right time. It happens now during the meetings of COP27 and also happens after a few days, I would say exactly 10 days since UAE announced its decision to reach net zero for the aviation sector. So it's our duty, and we count on our partners who are represented in this panel. We have many, actually the people in the panel represent partners that are working with us in the UAE to always improve and issue the policies and roadmaps that we require to achieve sustainability in this important sector. Thank you very much, my colleagues in the panel, for making the time. Your presence here is important and also will create awareness and knowledge among the audiences, whether they are online or attending this event in COP27. As you all know, the aviation sector is a very important sector for us in the UAE. UAE considered an important hub. Probably we are almost the third largest aviation industry after the US and China. And Dubai International Airport considered to be the biggest airport in the world. So this aviation industry also plays a very important role in our economy. It's an important contributor to our GDP, and it is expected to grow furthermore over the next few years. With this growth, having in mind the UAE's decision to achieve net zero as a whole, not only in the aviation sector, but UAE as a whole, achieving net zero by the year 2050, this really requires us to put a lot of efforts in order to reduce the emissions in this sector. UAE is a signatory of Paris Agreement, and we are part of the efforts that being done by ICAO and IATA to decarbonize the aviation sector. So we are committed to go through this path to reduce the emission and decarbonize the sector completely by the year 2050. And we believe that it's possible to achieve all this decarbonization through, of course, efficiency increase, through the use of low carbon fuel and sustainable aviation fuel, through the carbon offsetting programs that can be implemented. So many ways are there in order to reduce the carbon emission for this sector. As mentioned by my colleague Wafa, we were working on different initiatives together with the main stakeholders, international and national stakeholders. We hope to come out with the UAE roadmap for sustainable aviation fuel. It's almost ready. We'll issue it over the next few weeks. We were able to achieve this roadmap by working together by all the stakeholders. We are trying to have a roadmap that represents the requirement, intention, and targets of our national and international partners in this sector. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and I look forward to hear the latest industry update from your side. I really look forward to hear about the efforts that your entities do in order to achieve this noble target to decarbonize the sector. Again, thank you very much for being here, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now let me introduce our panelists for today. We have Mr. Haldin Dot, the Executive Director at the Air Transaction Group ATAC. Mr. Yasar Yitzikin, the Senior Consultant in ICF, specializing in sustainable aviation solutions. We have Engineer Mariam Likbesi, Head of Sustainability and Business Excellence Government, International and Communication in Etihad Airways. We have Mr. Kaljet Gatkaora, the President of Boeing in the Middle East, Turkey and Africa. We have Dr. Laya Barbara, Aviation Decarbonization Lead, World Economic Forum. And we have Ms. Jane Hope, the Special Envoy of the ICAO Secretary General to UNFCCC COP and serves as the Secretary of the ICAO Council's Committee in Aviation Environmental Protection. Welcome all. And now let's start our session. Since this session is for public, let's start with a general question. Mr. Haldin, what is SAF and what is the history of SAF? And what is the PTL and its relation to the SAF?
Absolutely. Thank you, Wafa, for that introduction, and good morning, everybody here in the room and also joining us online as well. So I think it's a very exciting time to be in the aviation decarbonization space. We've been increasing our commitments more and more and more. We're seeing more and more action across the world as well. Last year, the industry decided to adopt a goal of net zero carbon by 2050, becoming one of the first industries in the world to adopt this across the entire industry at a global level. And that was followed up by some work at ICAO that Jane is going to talk us through as well later on. When we look at decarbonizing the aviation industry, we're going to have to look at a range of different solutions. So certainly there's looking at new technology and a huge amount of work being done by the aircraft manufacturers on that. We're going to have to improve operations as well, making sure that we're flying our aircraft in better ways. And we're also going to have to look to out-of-sector measures, including reducing CO2 emissions through offsetting or through market-based measures. But one of the biggest chunks of action that the industry will need to take place over the next 30 years is shifting to a new type of fuel in our existing aircraft, and that is sustainable aviation fuels. So when you look back at the history of aviation, we've been very lucky in the fact that we've had one type of fuel that seems to work very, very well for us in our sector. It has the right qualities for us to carry it, to burn it at altitude where it doesn't freeze at too low a temperature, that it has the right energy density for us, and we've built a system over the last 100 years that distributes that all across the world. So we've been very lucky in that sense. However, the problem is it's made out of fossil fuels. And so for the last 14 years or so, we've really been looking at finding ways of replacing that fossil fuel source with an alternative source, and that's where sustainable aviation fuel comes in. So at the moment, there are 7 different pathways for generating sustainable aviation fuel. Most of the sustainable aviation fuel we're using today is coming from waste oils and fats. So it's production processes that we use the waste from and turn that into jet fuel. That's going to shift over time towards advanced sustainable aviation fuels using waste crop resources and eventually moving to, as Wafa said, power to liquid, which is literally taking green electricity to generate hydrogen, taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, combining them and generating sustainable aviation fuel out of that as well. So I think the lucky thing that we have is that we're looking at a range of different options that can be deployed depending on where you are in the world. And so in some countries where they have large amounts of agricultural waste or forestry waste, there's an opportunity to look at opportunities there. For countries that produce a large amount of excess cooking oil waste or fats and greases, then we can use the HEFA process there. And then for some countries which have a huge amount of opportunity with electricity to generate green electricity, then there's a real opportunity to look at power to liquid there. So hopefully that's sort of set the scene of what sustainable aviation fuels are, and I'll hand it back to Wafa.
Thank you, Mr. Haldin. Now we will go to Mr. Yassar. Can you give us an overview about SAF global policies and strategies and how the UAE SAF report is related to them?
Hi, sure. So thank you, Wafa, again for the question, and thank you, Minister of Infrastructure, Energy and Infrastructure of the UAE for the kind invitation. So on a global scale, we see that many aviation industry stakeholders adapting strategies, implementing strategies, and also lots of governments across the world building policies to scaling up SAF. So actually SAF is a tool for decarbonizing the aviation industry, and many airlines have already committed to net zero targets, or for example, as in World Economic Forum's Clean Skies for Tomorrow initiative, they have committed to 10% SAF utilization by 2030, for example. So they need SAF, and to do this, they are developing strategies for SAF, but I think one of the key tools that is being used today is offtake agreements, which I would like to explain a little bit more detail, because this is for securing a certain amount of SAF for a certain amount of duration between airlines and fuel producers. Because airlines, again, they committed to net zero, but there are also regulatory requirements that they need to meet for by using SAF. So they need to secure a certain amount of SAF. So they conduct these offtake agreements with emerging SAF producers. And today in the world, more than 28 million tons of SAF has been, through offtake agreements, 28 million tons of SAF was secured through more than 80 offtake agreements. And I think this is a very key tool from the airline side, but also, of course, from the fuel producer side, we see that On one hand, oil and gas majors, they are entering into SAF market, sometimes with co-processing, which is using existing refinery infrastructure with some biomass input, but then also they invest in standalone facilities across the world. But then we see a second kind of suppliers. They are technology developers. So they are working on emerging technologies for using SAF, more advanced technologies like power to liquids, for example, as mentioned. Although some oil and gas majors are also investing in power to liquids as well, but they are also exploring different feedstocks as well. And also investor community is also very interested in being a part of this journey. So they also supply SAF suppliers. I think maybe international organizations are also playing a key role, like again ATAC, IATA, World Economic Forum. So they have been setting the scene for the aviation decarbonization through aligning with long-term 2050 targets. And I think, of course, the most important leverage is, of course, the government support. Because SAF is an emerging technology, and as in all emerging technologies, government support is key. This has been also applied for solar and wind as well, and also for carbon capture or hydrogen. So government support at the early stages of development is key. And when we look at the world, we see different approaches. There's not one way, there's not a single approach. For example, when we look at the European Union, we see mandates. So European Union proposed 2% SAF utilization by 2025, increasing up to 5-6% by 2030, and increasing up to 63-85% by 2050. It is still under discussion, the new numbers, but this is a very strong demand signal for the market, for investors, for those fuel suppliers to invest in SAF, but also on another side, increasing the cost of carbon dioxide will indirectly benefit by reducing the premium, the gap in the European Union. In the United States, we see a different approach. There we see incentives, more like carrot mechanisms. So they are incentivizing SAF production, and there are different tools, but some of them are focusing on the emission reductions provided from the SAF. So SAF can provide based on different technologies and feedstocks, it can provide 80% emission reduction, or 90 or 60% emission reduction. And based on the carbon intensity of the fuel, the carbon credit is increasing. But there are also indirect benefits like 45Q, which is an incentive for carbon capture technology, which is a key instrument for the power to liquids technology. So this also indirectly supports the SAF scale-up. In UK, again, I'll very briefly just share the global landscape. The UK also proposed 10% SAF mandate by 2030, quite ambitious. Turkey proposed recently 5% by 2030. India, I was in India 3 days ago for IATA Aviation Energy Forum, and there the Indian authorities also shared that they are working on a SAF mandate. And also Japan shared their ambitions, their target, more like a target for 10% SAF in Japan by 2030. And so when on a global scale, we see lots of tools that can be used. And in the UAE, what we see is the strong commitment with this national UAE SAF roadmap for 700 million liters SAF production. So this is a strong commitment itself. It is very clear, the target is very clear, and also it is pragmatic. And because the UAE is a different story, because there are some challenges around the biogenic feedstock and the water scarcity, but there are lots of opportunities around, again, the renewable energy potential. So the next step, of course, for the UAE will be developing policy instruments to support this scale-up, because there are several tools at our disposal, whether mandates or supply side incentives. But of course, this roadmap, more broadly, will support the UAE's economic diversification agenda, because UAE has a non-oil dependent low carbon economy transition vision. And for example, as a part of this, the contribution of tourism industry in GDP is expected to increase by 2030, but this will be underpinned by the aviation activity. This means reduced jet fuel consumption. So in order to align with the other net zero targets of the nation, SAF will be key. But then also, of course, the hydrogen leadership roadmap or Operation 300 billion industrial strategies, they will, on one hand, support the power to liquids industry, for example, through the hydrogen production, but they will also benefit from the jobs created for the SAF scale-up, and also the environmental benefits also coming with the SAF. I think very broadly, on a global scale, we see different tools and mechanisms, but a big ambition, and UAE with this roadmap is also being a part of this ambition.
Thank you, Mr. Yassar. And this will take me again to Mr. Haldane to talk about how do countries take advantage of the energy transition in aviation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. I think if you look at where we've got our fuel from today, around 90% of fuel today, oil, comes from just 22 countries. But if you look at the opportunities that exist, and I mentioned a few of them before, that come from SAF production, actually we can expand that to almost every country on Earth to produce sustainable aviation fuel using local opportunities and local resources depending on where they are. We did some analysis looking at that, and of course, working over the next 30 years, we think that around 14 million jobs worldwide could be sustained or created through shifting to sustainable aviation fuel alone. And of course, there are lots of other new energy opportunities that exist as the whole economy shifts towards decarbonization as well. But in order to take advantage of that, we need to make sure that there's the right policy environment at place. I'm going to leave it to Jane to talk later on about some of the enabling factors that come from developing global policy. But I think importantly, we need to make sure that individual countries seize the opportunities that they have at a local level. So it's great to see what the UAE is doing, specifically around power to liquid and the sustainable aviation fuel supply chain there. But we also need to see the same thing happen in countries all across the world to see what opportunities exist, how can they be grasped to create a green energy future for aviation, but also green energy jobs for the rest of the economy as well.
Thank you, Mr. Haldane. And now we will go to Engineer Maryam. Maryam, can you briefly describe Etihad's sustainability priorities along with the challenges and opportunities airlines face when integrating sustainability in their corporate strategy?
Thank you very much, Wafa. I think, Wafa, you touched on some of our early interactions with sustainable aviation fuel, aka SAF, all the way back to 2011, alongside Boeing, ADNOC, and a host of other partners. Obviously, decarbonization is a priority of Etihad's. We're very impatient. We can't wait for technologies to mature enough for us to start utilizing them. We've been trailblazing in bootstrapping, basically, for anything that is available to us. And I think the take-home message from the session we held earlier is that use the available technology collectively to reduce emissions overall. So sustainable aviation fuel is a priority. The challenges we face, Wafa, with SAF are always quoted, and I'm sick and tired of hearing them, to be honest. Price, availability, and obviously the limitation of going beyond 50% blend. And our approach at Etihad is not why can't we, but how can we? And how can we make SAF available to us today? We utilize the book and claim system in a very successful example of our COP27 flight, guided by the guidelines from the Clean Skies for Tomorrow team, Dr. Laya present. And we feel that we can start using SAF in most of the ports we operate in, but whenever there is a lack of availability of SAF, book and claim can fit in. It will come at a cost, obviously, to us and eventually across the system. But I think the unique opportunity we had and we have in the UAE as Etihad is that our voice is heard as an industry. And we are part of the committee of transitioning to cleaner fuels. And this in itself, I think, is very reassuring for us as an industry because our voice is heard. And basically, the regulator is looking out for us and will help us in transitioning to cleaner fuels. So I think this Wafa summarizes basically where we are with SAF as Etihad. And I'll hand over to our fellow panelists to comment on that. Thank you.
Yes, so the next one I have a question for Mr. Kalje. What measures is Boeing taking to contribute to decarbonizing aerospace?
Yes, thank you, Wafa, and thank you so much for organising this panel. So good morning to everybody, good afternoon to everybody watching in the UAE. Firstly, look, it's a real honour to be here in the UAE pavilion. It's also an honour to be part of the official UAE delegation, and so we're very thankful for the UAE government for making us part of it. You know, so let's reflect. Why is this so important? Because if you look at the numbers, emissions from aviation are only 2%, 2.6%, and they're only 12% of the whole transport sector. Well, the reason it's important is that 80% of people globally have never got on a plane. You know, if you look at the projections up to 2050, you're looking at a doubling of passenger numbers. So, you know, starting at 4.5 billion that was recorded in 2019, that's going to go up to 10 billion people. Why is it important to the UAE? Well, look, you know, the UAE for Boeing is one of the most thriving markets. We've got 3 of our best customers, Etihad, Emirates, Fly Dubai. And if you look at it, aviation in the sector is so important to the UAE. 1 in 10 jobs in the UAE is aviation related, which is a really significant number. It represents something like 13% of GDP. So this is important that we urgently take steps to resolve these issues for aviation, and also particularly for the UAE, given its real interest in this sector. So what, as an aircraft manufacturer, do we do? So firstly, it begins with the planes. Every time we bring out a new airplane model, there is something like a 15 to 25% fuel efficiency improvement. So if you look at the Boeing 737 MAX, that's a 20% improvement. And I think you can expect that when OEMs bring out the new airplane designs, efficiency, fuel efficiency, and emissions are going to be the #1 priority going forward. That's what's going to drive design in the future. So it's crucially important. We can also ensure that the planes that we manufacture are capable and certified to fly on 100% sustainable aviation fuel. So we made that commitment in our 2020 sustainability report, and we said that we would do that by 2030. What's the other thing that we can do? Well, we can make sure that we are, in our own operations, we are net zero. So I'm proud to say that we went net zero in our own operations in 2020. We did this by carbon offsetting, by driving efficiencies, but also by purchasing large amounts of sustainable aviation fuel. I think we announced the purchase of something like 2 million gallons, which for an airframer is the largest ever purchase. So you've got to put your money where your mouth is on this issue, and you've got to walk the walk as well as talking about it. The other area, look, we've talked a lot about sustainable aviation fuel. Boeing plays an important role in that fuel getting certified. You know, so if you go back to 2008, we were part of the initial testing of sustainable aviation fuel. Wind forward to 2011, we were part of the group that got that certified for commercial use. As we want to push that boundary to have more than 50% of sustainable aviation fuel, that percentage move up to 100, Boeing's going to play an important role there. And we can also play an important role by partnering. You know, it was mentioned earlier on today, and I would reiterate, partnership is everything here. Partnership across the board, globally, locally, wherever you can do it. And we have been very lucky to find a very, very strong and willing partner in the government of the UAE and in Etihad. So, you know, we talked about the SBRC. I was personally involved in that over 10 years ago. That's how long the relationship has lasted. We've been very proud to work with Etihad on the eco demonstrator 787 Greenliner. This has really been there to test these different technologies that we all heard about that can be deployed on an aircraft to make them fuel efficient. And of course, we were part of the industry group that contributed to the power to liquid study. And that study is really important because, again, the UAE is out in front on these issues. It was the first to commit to, in the region, to commit to net zero by 2050. It's been a first mover now in setting very, very bold and audacious goals to produce SAF on an industrial scale in the UAE to a point where it can actually export that and therefore create jobs in the economy. And we are totally on board with that. We are there to support that in every way that we can. So I will conclude there, but as I say, I think main point is partnership, collaboration at every level of this ecosystem, government, regulators, manufacturers, across the board. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khalji. And now we will move to Dr. Laya. Dr. Laya, please tell us about the Clean Sky for Tomorrow initiative and what actions will be required to achieve the net zero aviation in the United Arab Emirates and globally.
Thank you, Wafa. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Sharm to the virtual attendees following this session today. Thanks also to the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructures of the UAE, and big congratulations to the whole country for this major step forward that this UAE SAF roadmap represents. At the Clean Skies for Tomorrow, we're a multi-stakeholder coalition that we partnered with the UAE in developing this power-to-liquid roadmap that then gave place to this broader national SAF roadmap. We've now heard several comments from my fellow panelists, and if there's one thing clear, is that the future will no longer look like the past. And those countries that really take a proactive approach to this will do way better, will move faster, and this will have a reward. And as we move from commitment to action, it is essential, it is crucial that the industry is backed by national policies and national roadmaps that back the same decarbonization goal, like the net zero for 2050, and that's why this national SAF roadmap, it's a major step forward. And the same applies to the industry, actually. Those players that want to be part of the solution, those players that do a big bet into sustainability, as we've heard from some of our colleagues here today, this will also pay off. This will entail a comparative advantage in the market, for sure. Having said that, I would like now to reflect a bit for a moment on the time scale, because while we're all clear about the importance of destination technologies and 2050 and the goal for net zero, we're also rapidly approaching the emissions cliffs. And that emphasizes actually the need to start acting now and to start bending the emission curve now in the next 5 years, even before 2030, in order to be onto the right path to net zero by mid-century. And I believe that it is important to note the need to balance destination technologies with transition technologies like LCAF can be, while destination technologies ramp up, like power to liquids. So just wanted to emphasize the need to balance long-term climate action with short-term climate goals. Having said that, look, aviation, it is a hard-to-abate sector. There's no doubt about this. But the industry is willing, ready, and committed. We have now, finally, a global commitment from the governments to reach net zero by 2050. There are technologies available today. Sustainable aviation fuels are available today. We still need to invest in R&D and bring them further in the maturity curve, but they exist today. So we have all the ingredients, we have all it takes. It's all about getting together all the actors that benefit from flying, realizing the importance to act now and reach this net zero goal. So I'll finish by saying UAE extending our hands here to support the implementation of this SAF national roadmap from our side. So thank you, Wafa, and thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Laya. And now we'll go to Ms. Jane. Ms. Jane, the last ICAO Assembly reached a historical agreement on aviation and climate change. Could you elaborate on the achievement?
Thank you, Wafa. So, great pleasure to be here. And is even more so because it's so easy to come to talk about good news, right? Mm-hmm. So we have excellent news. In fact, just a month ago, we have held our ICAO Assembly. It's a triennial assembly. We have 193 member states of ICAO, and those governments decided to align the objective of international aviation with the objectives of the Paris Agreement, the temperature. So that means we are all moving towards net zero 2050. And those are very good news from the sector. It's not the first time we do that, put a goal for aviation. We did that 12 years ago when we established a midterm goal, carbon neutral growth from 2020. At the time, that looked so ambitious. And what happened then was that triggered so much action. And that's the good thing about the goal. You establish the goal, everybody goes to the same objective, that triggers so much action. And you have just heard from the panelists before me, so much action is ongoing to get to that objective. So last time, the 2020 goal triggered a CO2 standard for the certification of our aircraft. It triggered a global offsetting scheme for international aviation, the only global offsetting scheme for a sector. And that means that we don't backslash the emissions. It's 2020 is our limit there. And from there now, we have the new goal moving forward and going to net zero 2050. It was not easy to get to those agreements in the Assembly. And what we were requested was to prove that that was feasible first before they took that decision. And that was a big undertaking. We have 400 of the best experts in the world producing a feasibility study for how aviation could decarbonize. And that study, publicly available on our website, provided 3 scenarios. And at the end, our Assembly decided to go to the more ambitious scenarios and go to the net zero 2050. That's major. Most of the discussions with our member states, and we all have to realize we have 193 member states, and they are not starting from the same starting point to get to the net zero. So a lot of discussions where if we want to go for a very ambitious goal, we have to go for very ambitious means of implementation. And that means a lot of capacity building, but also a lot of finance that will be needed. And that was the crucial discussion in that assembly. In looking at the study, the one thing that comes very clear to everybody is that SAF, it's a major component of that response. Technology will deliver a lot. We are looking at the manufacturers developing electric aircraft that can fly with 100% SAF, more improvements in the current fleets, hydrogen, etc. But you have the operational part that you can minimize the emissions through your routes, but it is SAF that will deliver the bulk of it. Around 55% of that response in the future will come from SAF. So that became our highest priority. The second reason why we are looking so closely to SAF is because, as Howden mentioned before, you had a full hand of countries that were producing the entire fuel for aviation. But now we potentially have 193 countries that will be able to produce SAF. They will produce it differently. There's not a one-fits-all. Depending on the situation of each of these countries, they have a different vocation. They could have an agriculture vocation, and so they will do a secondary crop. They might want to renew their plants and transform their plants to SAF. There's so many opportunities there. There's different pathways. There are different feedstocks. I always like to say you might not know it, but you're already flying an aircraft that's using used cook oil in a mix of your of your fuel that is using rest of woods. You know, there were flights in Japan using recycled cotton T-shirts as the source of the fuel, putting into an aircraft. There is no end to it. And many of those solutions for the developing countries is a win-win-win. Why? They all want to participate. They are not all producers of aircraft. They are not all looking into these operational measures so closely because they are not big hubs that are very congested. But all of them could be players in SAF. And I think that was the most important outcome of the assembly.
Thank you. I have another question. What are the plans and the main challenges for the implementation of the ICAO LTAG and the role of the clean energy in this path?
So taking that decision was not easy, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. And now we know the plan, we know what we have to do, but how we are going to get there. So we heard a lot of synergies, partnerships, et cetera, Just before the assembly, we looked into a program, and let me go a little bit before, when we established this global offsetting scheme, we also had this situation where states didn't have the capability of doing it, so we had something called ACT Corsia, is assistance, capacity building and training for Corsia. And that helped our states to understand what to do, how to do, and they could engage. And they are all now reporting to ICAO yearly on their the emissions, et cetera. Now, we have created something called ACT SAF. It's the same program, but it goes beyond. Because now it's not only with governments, but we are engaging with industry, we are engaging with financial institutions, we are engaging in developing organizations, we are deeply involved with the industry. So all of them are signing up to the ACT SAF. And what that means is that we mix and match these vocations, interests, needs, and we put them together. For example, just as an example, we just have WEF signing into WhatsApp. WEF has been talking about 300 plants by 2030. If we have 193 states and we just target one plant by state, you almost have 200 plants already. And you are bringing all those states to the play, to play into SAF. They get engaged in the solution. They participate in the reduction of the CO2. So that's a major thing. So SAF, it's able to bring them to the play. And what we are needing now really is to scale up the production and really look into the financing. If you try to buy SAF today, you cannot. If you try to buy SAF for next year, you cannot. It's all sold. What we really, everybody has committed long-term commitments to buy the SAF. So that has really talked to us about the de-risking of that investment. So the financial side is telling us the money is there. What we need now is to look at this framework more closely. So the first step is done. We have agreed on net zero 2050. That gave the sign to the financial world that we are very serious about it. But now we are going to put also a big plan moving forward on exactly how we are going to do that. And we need to put all those players together. There's so many good activities and initiatives that we heard, but if I want to recognize them, if I want to account for the benefits, I need to harmonize all of that. And that's where ICAO comes, and we are, let's say, the house where everybody can agree on how to move forward together. How we can harmonize those things, how we can add up all of that. So ACT SAF will be a big platform that will be showcasing how much is being invested, how much is being reduced on the CO2, how close are we to get to the objectives that we want. So we are very excited, and yes, partnership is everything. And leading by example is very important. So we congratulate UAE for the big example that they are bringing forward as an aviation state in ICAO, and to other countries that want to embark. You know, they see it's possible. They see it's feasible. They learn with it. So that's very important. We are super excited with all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jane. And now we reach the end. But before ending, if maybe anyone can add one sentence. We have only 1 minute. If you would like to add anything.
I think Dr. Laya alluded to a very, very important point, an interim solution to before we fully start utilizing SAF, lower carbon aviation fuels. Again, to the point of use what is available today as well to expedite the reduction. As Haldane said and Yasar mentioned, every small reduction is significant for the industry. The partnership element that Kuljit also highlighted is extremely important. And the fact that you facilitated sort of a knowledge-sharing platform alongside ICAO, I think is very useful. So we have a lot of guidance available to us. I think we just need to log online to these portals and read a lot. But we're definitely committed on integrating SAF and LCAF in our strategy.
Maybe I can also just add to that. I think we hear again and again that aviation's a hard to abate sector, and yes, we are to a certain extent, but I think the difference with aviation is that we're very used to working together. We do it every single day. Every single flight that takes off is a collaborative effort between industry partners, between governments, all working together to make sure one flight happens. We do that 120,000 times a day across the planet. On an individual operational flight basis, we can do it together as well when it looks to solving some of these big issues. So we know what our pathway is. We know what we need to do. We need to bring everybody else on board, but I'm very confident that we can actually achieve this in a way that brings connectivity to people across the world as well. So I'm very excited about the future.
If I may just add, because we heard a lot of we need the right policies to incentivize, etc. We will be having a big conference next year in ICAO on sustainable fuels, and we are talking about sustainable fuels. So we have criteria in ICAO that we have already developed to ensure the sustainability of those fuels. We have all the technical work being done to really make sure that we can assess the benefits of the different pathways and feedstocks that we receive. But there is one very important point. As I said, it's not one fits all, and those policies have to be very careful to be technology agnostic and feedstock agnostic, because it's important that each one be able to develop its SAF with the best of their abilities. And when we start putting very restrict policies that only looked into one kind of production, one kind of feedstock, you take out a lot of the players from that future. So we have to be very careful that those policies really incentivize the SAF and do not put any economic barriers or other barriers for the development of SAF throughout the world. If you fly from one country to the other with SAF, you will love to come back also with SAF in your airplane, right? So they have to produce the SAF. So we have to have this global vision of the aviation as a system, and we have to engage all of the countries in that mix. So I just wanted to highlight the 2 points: sustainability and technology and feedstock agnostic for our framework. But that conference next year, all the players will be there with all our states, and we will be defining this more clearly, this global framework, discussing very important things like book and claim, mandates, etc., in such a way that will really, really incentivize the industry.
Last remarks from my side as well. It is time to work with the doers. It is time to work together with those that want to bring the future forward, this sustainable aviation future that we've been speaking about for quite some time now, and just re-emphasize that the World Economic Forum stands ready to work together, to collaborate together for implementation to make this a reality as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you all. We reached the end. At the end, I would like to thank you all for the participating and attending our session about the National UAE SAF Roadmap. Looking to see you in another session in the Inspirational Projects for Sustainable Energy Initiative soon. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you all.